You said you saw melted tour buses, melted cars.
The cars that were right down there, it was just unbelievable. They were twisted and melted into nothing. The debris is just unbelievable. And then you can see fire trucks and police vehicles that were down there early that all their windows, the windshields are completely blown out must have been from when debris dropped.
But even more jarring, I think, is this scene right here. Look at these two cars placed on top of one another. I think when you think about the impact that these planes must have had, it's hard to visualize it because everything melted. But here, at least you have some remnants. You have literally an engine that is melded together with other parts of the car. Moving over, you've got another car they moved here. It looks like it's been through a war. You can see the papers, all the burned out papers from the building. You see the soot and the dirt, and it just shows you how devastating this blast was. Look across the street there. You've got a Con Ed truck that, you know, some of the Con Ed people now looking at, examining, trying to figure out which truck that actually was. But that truck, too, in terrible shape. So while many of the items, the steel, was literally melted.
People who have been right down next to the base of what was the trade towers say there's virtually nothing left. Maybe a few flights of stairs, a few stories of one of the buildings, but that when they came down, there was so much melting and so much demolishing of any kind of structure that they cannot imagine much being left or much hope of finding anybody alive. But we had ABC crews come back just in the last few minutes, including correspondent Don Daler, telling us there are still flames coming out of the base of the trade towers. They're pouring water onto it, trying to get the trade towers themselves cooled down enough to move into the very center of it.
And what's to explain, Governor, the smoke that still comes out of the fire?
There's still fire down below. There is such an incredibly deep pile of rubble, and the tower goes down 5-6 stories underground, that there's still fire underneath, smoldering.
Data from satellite imagery showed that the sites where the three buildings collapsed continued to be extremely hot in the days after 9/11. Weeks after the attack, recovery workers continued to discover molten metal at ground zero.
This is how it's been since day one. Oh, it's unbelievable. And this is 6 weeks later, almost 6 weeks later. And as we get closer to the center of this, it gets hotter and hotter. It's probably 1,500 degrees. We've had some small windows into what we thought was a core at some point, and it looked like an oven. You know, it was just roaring inside. And it's just a bright, reddish orange color. See that stuff he's pulling out? What was that, Chief? We're gonna hold off on the water. See the stuff he's pulling out? Yeah. It's red hot. If we hit it too much steam, you won't be able to see what he's doing. Great.
You see how this debris is still smoking? That's from the fires that are still burning. 8 weeks later, we still got fires burning. Every now and then, one of the pieces of equipment will dig in, they'll open up a small area, the oxygen will rush in, and you'll get this plume of brown, black smoke coming up. That's because that fire just got more oxygen. So, I mean, these things are burning. At one point, I think they were about 2,800 degrees.
Underground fires, ignited by burning jet fuel, smoldered for months, fed by molten steel and buried carpeting, office furniture, wood paneling, and paper.
You'd get down below and you'd see molten steel running down the channel rails, like you're in a foundry.
Yeah, like lava.
Like it was lava
from a volcano. Underground, it was still so hot that molten metal dripped down the sides of a wall from Building 6.
However, they do hit hot spots occasionally, and everything stops.
There were fires of 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit below the ground.
The fire is burning from the bottom because you have so many million square feet of office space that are in those towers. What kind of combustibles are in 1 million square feet of office space? The paper, the furniture, the carpets. The fires got very intense down there and actually melted beams where it was molten steel that was being dug out.
Steel-toed boots is one of the biggest things. Out still on the rubble, it's still, I believe, 1,100 degrees. The guy's boots just melt within a few hours.
You saw steel, some of the thickest steel I've ever seen, bent like a pretzel. And you just couldn't imagine the force that took.
All the iron is all crumbled. I don't know if a person that's never been an iron worker could imagine, but all of this massive iron, I mean pieces that weigh 20 tons, 50 tons, all mangled and just crushed and crumbled up.
The grapplers were pulling stuff out, big sections of iron that were literally on fire on the other end. They would hit the air and burst into flames, which was pretty spooky to see.
There was even a point where you would create an air pocket by moving steel, fueling the fires underground, would ignite cars and cars would just blow up. But, you know, these underground fires were just like the fires of hell.
This 8-ton steel I-beam is 6 inches thick. It was selected to be preserved for future generations for the near-perfect horseshoe-like bend formed during the collapse.
I found it hard to believe that it actually bent because of the size of it and how there's no cracks in the iron. It bent without almost a single crack in it. It takes thousands of degrees to bend steel like this.
Typically you'd have buckling and tearing on the tension side, but there's no buckling at all.
One of the more unusual artifacts to emerge from the rubble is this rock-like object that has come to be known as the meteorite.
It's this fused element of steel, molten steel and concrete and all of these things all fused by the heat into one single element.
And almost like a chunk of lava from Kilauea or Iceland, where they're very sharp but breakable shards on the end here.
And architects, engineers, people who work with steel, welders have just never seen the level of destruction and the level of deformation of this material in our lives.